If you like this channel and what I do here, please help to support my work by checking out one of my books, available from Lulu Publishing and Amazon.com. Thank you. Hiya folks, Carl James here from Electric Media Madness, joining me for another rewatchable, very special rewatchable today. I have a special guest with me. He is a researcher, author and lecturer on all manner of subjects relating to alternative knowledge. His two websites, checktheevidence.com and cvpandemicinvestigation.com, are a treasure trove of highly detailed and meticulously researched evidence, and I highly recommend that you go and check them out. The man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway, my good friend and fellow researcher, Andrew Johnson. How you doing, mate?
Not too bad, Carl. It's good to join you on this sort of discussion of one of our mutual interests, one of several mutual interests, many mutual interests even.
Yes. Apart from our interest in alternative knowledge and the research that we do and that, I think it became quite apparent, actually, because you and I have known each other for at least 10 years now. I think it's
just about 10 years. I think we first met in 2011, didn't we?
Yeah. And I think it became apparent very early on that we shared an interest in science fiction as well, outside of that, because we could see, we talked about how there's these synchronicities between the alternative knowledge research subjects and science fiction. But there's also a love of certain science fiction as well that you and I share. It's something that maybe we could get into towards the end of the video, that our ideas on sort of where I think it is, but sort of the standing on where science fiction is in relation to the sort of the bigger picture. You know, people talk about predictive programming and things like that, talk about, you and I both know that there are some people, I'm always holding Kubrick up as an example of that, who do sort of metaphorically put some truths out there, quite big truths as well, and it's a tough one to get your head around sometimes, isn't it? You know, sometimes it's
it is. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting how we both, I mean, we say we're interested in science fiction, but we're two people that are interested enough in the past to have gone to various conventions. Now, some people just watch stuff on the telly and quite interested, but some people go to the conventions, like I've been to, I think, 3 or 4 Star Trek conventions over the last sort of the first one I went to was with my friend, one of my university friends.
All right.
And that was way back, I think, in 1987 or 88, when they had the World Science Fiction Convention in Brighton.
Really? I didn't realize that it was in UK.
Yeah, well, that might have been slightly before your time where you were doing such things, you see, perhaps. I don't know.
I was... I was still in my early teens then, so
right.
I did go to them, but not. Perhaps not.
Right, but I took a trip down there with my friend. I was working by then, so I had the money to do it. I wouldn't have had the money to do it before, a couple of years before that. So I was still at university then. But yeah, so we have that sort of strong enough interest to be interested in. Maybe meeting some of the actors, listening to some of the script writers that you get at these events, and you get some of the backstory, and I think certainly what you taught me was, actually getting to know a bit about the people that write the stories, write the scripts, come up with the ideas, maybe a bit about people that do some of the artwork, some of the design and stuff. You do start to get into there being more than just science fiction there, more than just entertainment there, more than just good and bad storylines, and more than just good and bad acting and so forth. But I think certainly I think you probably agree that whatever conclusions you come to about what is or isn't going on, and one of the episodes we're going to talk about is actually precisely in that area.
I should say, by the way, that we, for the viewers watching, we are actually going to be talking about Star Trek today, Star Trek Voyager specifically, and we've 2 specific episodes that we've watched that we're going to be talking about. Sorry, Andrew. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so you still have an appreciation. I mean, certainly something like science fiction, there's an enormous amount of effort goes into making such things. Way more to me, imagination, thought, creativity, design work that goes into creating something like a Star Trek episode, whatever you might think of it, than any other type of entertainment on TV or film. I think science fiction has much more work that goes into it.
Yeah,
it's generally a lot more expensive to produce, and I think when you get a good script and a good story, you can't beat it for actually setting your mind into a different frame of thinking.
Yeah.
Now, I think we both felt that things like Star Trek were responsible for giving us a broader perspective on the world and indeed the universe.
I'd like initially, to think so, yeah. Yeah.
Right, and this is something which so I used to sit and watch Star Trek when I was about 4 or 5 years old with my mum, when we had a black and white telly, and so I got that kind of bug from an early age, in that you look into something greater, something wider, something away from earthly sort of matters.
Yeah,
there's this greater thing going on. And what I was going to say, though, was, without going on for too long,
that's okay,
is that I think you and I now both appreciate that can be used in a positive way by somebody, or it can be used in a manipulative way.
Yes.
And
yes.
I think some of what we're going to talk about tonight will touch on both sides of that kind of thing. I think. So yeah, so I think that's, some people, Star Trek is just kids program or something, or they've made it for adults, and what are all these people that go to these conventions and dress up, and
it's bizarre because it's
costumes, but there's much more to it than that.
Oh yeah, I mean the amount of evidence that I've gathered in my in science fiction and global agenda. And that isn't even that's scratching the surface of it. It
is indeed, and that, you gathered a lot of good information there. And Carl's been generous enough to give the books away for free in PDF form.
Yeah, they're available on Andrew's website, checktheevidence.com.
Yeah.
Even though I'm always plugging them on Amazon, that's but they are available for free as well if people want to.
Same with my books, so people can get them for free, and there's a lot of very
I'll just plug here for you as well. I've got them here.
Oh, right,
I've got something here for Andrew Johnson. Yeah, check them out. There's more than that, but
I should get yours. I've got it on the shelf.
No, it's all right. I'm always plugging mine. I'm shamelessly shilling it.
Well, you're not really plugging it if you're giving it away, are you? So
No, but I absolutely agree. It's interesting. I had a conversation with somebody recently about this whole notion of the Federation in Star Trek, and I'd had written about this in my book, and somebody said it's basically just a thinly veiled new world, or no, one world government, effectively. It's that kind of model, isn't it? And they said, well, how can you love Star Trek? How can you sit down and watch all those old? You say that you quite regularly watch them, which I do, and I said, look. And this is probably going to sound very, very controversial. I'm probably going to get some flack for saying this from people. But I said, you know what? I said, if all that goes on in the world was like that, I would bring it on. Bring on your one world government. Free energy, free technology, no hunger, no greed, all that kind of thing. Bettering yourself, exploring, all that kind of thing. But you and I know that that's not. It's not like that, and it's not going to happen like that, and there are vested interests controlling globalist one world government agendas and that. So it's not.
Just to respond to that, one of the sort of thoughts that I've had about that, and this maybe will sort of segue into my experience with meeting some of the Star Trek cast members in 2005, where I think that this will follow, from this comment into that, is that the Star Trek universe that has been created, it's the reason why it has such a sort of ardent and loyal fan base is because it's a very appealing universe for just the reasons that you described.
And I think it's designed that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's
to make it so appealing.
Yeah, it is. And and of course these days, we've got Xboxes, PlayStations, and whatnot. and they offer very realistic virtual worlds to inhabit. And really, you could argue that the Star Trek universe is kind of the forerunner, the non-interactive version of that. And that's why these conventions are so popular, I think, because that's like, the old-fashioned way of entering the video game and interacting with your fellow fans and fellow people that like to inhabit the Star Trek universe. That those are the conventions. Whereas now, of course, you can do that online with, my son, for example, he's 21 and he spends the vast majority of his free time gaming, and so now you can do all of that in the virtual world. And not the Star Trek universe has become less of a draw, perhaps for many, because you've got these other virtual worlds now. But I think, and going back to that, where you get into this appealing sort of Star Trek universe where the baddies almost always lose, maybe not in every episode, but if there's a two-parter, they'll lose at the end. At the end of the first part, the baddies appear to be winning, and there's no, they're going to
traditional Trek. I think it strayed away from that wildly as the franchise moved on, but certainly the original series, Next Generation, to some degree Star Trek Voyager as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's part of the appeal, that the good guys do win, and they always outsmart the bad guys, and that of course is part of the appeal.
Can I just interject just for 1 second? It's just something that just came to my mind. There's an episode earlier on in Star Trek Next Generation where they revive these three people from the 1980s. They're frozen in capsules. I don't know if you remember the episode. I think it was called The Neutral Zone, end of season 1, something like that. And one of them is like a housewife who's missing a family. Another one's like this drinking, guitar playing, sort of having a good time. And the other one's obviously a bankster type, financial sort of chappy. And he's constantly creating havoc on the ship, and keeps going on about his portfolio and the lawyers and blah, 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 and all this kind of thing. And Picard says to him, we're beyond that now. And he said, well, what's the aim? What's the goal now? And Picard says the quest, the challenge is to enrich yourself, is to better yourself, drink it up, sort of thing, enjoy it. That's what life is. And I think that hits at the heart of what appeals to so many Star Trek fans about Star Trek, is that positivity, that it's not doom and gloom, and it is about, you can inspire yourself and challenge yourself, and something I always got from it anyway. I just wanted to say that, because it just
absolutely I think that's again a big part of its appeal, that and there's not really any bitching and backbiting amongst the
unless it's Star Trek Discovery, but
well, indeed, I haven't watched any of that, because
no, you're not missing much.
I heeded your warning, basically, and but going back to this idea of the Star Trek universe being more appealing than the real one, as it were. You would think that anybody that was interested in Star Trek, and indeed at least some of the cast members, would have an interest in aliens, as in real aliens, not science fiction aliens. And I suppose for somebody like me, I've always had an interest in that, aliens, UFOs, and all that stuff from the age of about 10, and it actually, ran in parallel with my interest in things like Star Trek. I mean, to me,
same with me,
and then I think I came across some people that were interested in Star Trek, but they didn't really seem interested in aliens and UFOs and stuff particularly. But I suppose, by and large, it's true. We are, but we're not. We're interested in science fiction, and many people are interested in aliens and UFOs because we have the Sci-Fi Channel, for example, and I remember the James Fox documentary Out of the Blue, which came out in, I think, around about 2002, 2003, maybe a bit before then. But I know for a fact that it was partly funded, it was bought by the Sci-Fi Channel. I don't know whether they funded the production of it, but it was shown on Sci-Fi. So, and and it's not science fiction, this Out of the Blue. I recommend that anybody that hasn't seen that documentary.
It's a very good documentary.
It's still one of the best. I mean, it's to say, it's getting on frighteningly for 20 years old now. But it's Peter Coyote narrates it. He was the guy in E.T., Steven Spielberg's film.
Yeah.
And so I recommend that people watch that documentary. Is very, very good. And so, by saying that, we can see there is, at least as far as the general media are concerned, that they pigeonhole the UFO issue and the science fiction thing kind of into the same pigeonhole, which is in of itself should tell us something, and indeed it does.
It raises eyebrows, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does, and how that's handled. So I suppose, maybe I shouldn't be too surprised when, it all gets mixed together and people don't really want to look at the factual information about the evidence for extraterrestrial life, and indeed seem to be almost quite frightened by it.
And I think to some degree there's an agenda to that, which we'll get into. Certainly one of my experiences I had with Robert Picardo, but I can come to that in a bit. But yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And then before we go and talk about this episode, so and I put this in my book, the Acknowledge, which is the perspective on the matters of UFOs, aliens, and crop circles, and then you can download that free. But in that book, I describe my experience of going to meet Celeste Yarnall.
Mm-hmm.
Celeste Yarnall was one of these sort of semi minor characters. She played, I forget the name of her character.
It was crikey, Yeoman Landon. I know it was the Apple. The episode was the Apple.
The Apple.
Yeoman Landon or something like that. Martha Landon. That was it. Yeah, come to me, Martha Landon.
Right.
Yeah.
And I didn't know who she was, but she was given my contact email by my friend Lloyd Pye, who's sadly no longer with us.
Yeah.
And apparently Celeste Yarnall was coming to the UK, and she'd asked to meet me for some reason. I didn't really understand this, because this was way before I had, say way before. It was a year before I set up Check the Evidence, and they didn't really have much published online. I had a couple of articles published on another website, which wasn't mine, and I'd done a few podcasts with people. I wasn't, I hadn't really done very much at that point. So I was a bit mystified why this lady would want to meet me, and then I didn't know who she was, but I checked her out, and it turns out, as you say, she was in this. I think, was it season 2, season 3?
I think the Apple was season. I can't remember. I'm not. I should be more familiar with it, but yeah.
Anyway, people can look it up.
Yeah.
What I hadn't realised is that this lady was Elvis Presley's girlfriend for.
She was. Yeah, I'd forgotten that as well.
So, wow, that's quite interesting. And anyway, the weird thing was, and you were talking about synchronicities. I can tell this little synchronicity story. I've told this before, but it turns out I exchanged a couple of emails with her, and she said, "Oh, I'm coming to England to do a Star Trek event." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And I said, "Where are you going to be?" And she said, "Oh, I'm going to Leicester." I said, "Oh, and whereabouts in Leicester?" "Oh, I'm going to be at the Holiday Inn on this." I think it was actually, oddly enough, it was. I think it was the 10th of September, 2005. I think that was the date, and that was the only day I could go, because I was going on the following day up to the Lake District for a family get together. Actually, that would have been 11th September 2005. But she was coming to Leicester on the 10th of September. And I said, "Where are you going to Holiday Inn?" "Oh, okay." And then, as it turned out, I was actually doing some work in Leicester. I don't work in Leicester normally. I only do there. Well, at that point, I was doing 1 or 2 days a week work in Leicester doing student assessments. And it turned out I was already booked in to see students in Leicester on the day she was coming, even before we'd arranged to meet.
Right.
And then the Holiday Inn, I didn't know where that was in Leicester, because I didn't know it that well. It was a quarter of a mile from where I was assessing the students. So I was literally able to, sort of do the student assessment, then
walk around,
walk across to the Holiday Inn to meet her. And I met her, and I met Armin Shimmerman.
That's an interesting story as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, Denise Crosby. She was drinking pints of Guinness. Interesting. And she introduced me to them. She said, "Oh, hello, here's Armin, here's Denise." And I said, "Oh, yeah, okay." And sort of recognised them. I chatted to them for a bit. and I had a little laptop with me. It was a little Sony Vaio, actually, a little sort of netbook type thing. And on there, I had some stuff that I'd collected about Mars. And I might try and sort of screen share this if I can get it. I should have got this up, but I got some stuff about Mars, and
we can always pop them up afterwards anyway if you wanted to.
Right. Well, maybe you'll slot these in. I'll send you them rather than spend too much time here. And you know, there's this crater dome on Mars. There's this T-shape and stuff from the Mars Global Survey missions. And I was trying to sort of get them interested in this, so it's pretty weird. But I realized fairly quickly that they just really weren't that interested.
Yeah.
No. And which kind of struck me as odd. But Celeste was, and Celeste, she's been really interested. This is why, because she was actually, as I say, she was sent my contact details by Lloyd Pye, and the reason was, and I'll try and share this screen in a minute.
I know she was very much into sort of holistic medicine and things like that. I did know that about her.
Right.
She was very much sort of into, I think she wrote a couple of books actually about holistic medicine in animals, dogs and cats and things like that. I don't know. So, yeah.
You can see here, this is what I was showing them bits of to the Armin Shimmerman and Denise Crosby. I had it on there. I was passing around this little Sony Vaio laptop, and I was trying to explain what this is. And this is a human skull on the top. And this is the so-called Starchild skull on the bottom, which was picked up by Lloyd Pye from Ray and Melanie Young, and it's got 25 major physical differences between a human and this Starchild skull. The eye socket's 1/2 inch deep. The bone structure is all different, as you see here. It's got this dimple at the back. It's got no inion. The neck hole is different. Where the chewing muscles attach is different. It has no brow ridges. All human skulls have brow ridges. It has no sinuses. On and on and on. And I was trying to explain some of this, but they really weren't that interested. And I think I ended up just talking to Celeste Yarnell, who was interested. And we actually sat and talked for 3 hours straight. I think she went off to do a bit of a speech in the main hall.
Yeah.
But she was very gracious. And
I'm not surprised, actually, what I've read about her. I'm not surprised that, when you tell me that she was,
So, so that was a really interesting meeting her. And she was a very kind person. And we got on very well. And I started telling her about 9/11 as well, but she was quite wary of that. She didn't try and sort of shut me down or anything. She just thought, oh, that's a bit sort of scary. I don't think Americans like talking about that. And she's right, But anyway, so that was my experience of meeting some Starchild members. And actually, she was kind enough to say to the group there, because there was this group of organisers who'd organised the event, And I remember this is a bit I was wanted to sort of insert really was that she was stood next to him and saying, oh, Andrew's got some really interesting information. You should help him organise a talk or something. And I wasn't saying anything, because
she was the one doing it. Yeah, that's right.
She was the one saying it. And I was looking at these people and I just thought, they're not interested. I could tell it was written all over their faces. They are only interested in Star Trek. They're not interested in aliens. They're not interested in UFOs. They're not interested in anything like that. They're just interested in Star Trek.
That's right. Yeah.
And that was quite an education for me, really. I think at that point. But it was kind of one of those things. When I could see the situation, reading the situation, and just being in that, been to a few of these conventions and stuff, you pick up a vibe, and
you do.
Kind of where it's at with that, and you see the topics and questions that come up and that sort of thing. And hardly anyone ever asks them, oh, have you had any experience with UFOs? Have you ever met an alien or anything, or anything like that? That sort of question never comes up. It's about how the scripts, the wardrobe, costume, how did you get on with the actors? Why didn't you like William Shatner?
It's the same old generic sort of questions.
Those sorts of things. I mean, they're not all the time. And
no, but by and large, I think they've got it down pat, haven't they, for a lot of the time.
And I think following conversations with you, about people like LeVar Burton, I picked up on another. Because the other interesting thing is that quite a lot of these Star Trek conventions are on YouTube now. Some of these sort of
especially with everything that's been going on recently, they're more online now, zooming it and doing and that.
Yeah. But there was one from, I think, 2018, 2017, where there was this guy. I mentioned it in my book because it's quite interesting, based on, as I say, what conversations we had about people like LeVar Burton, who was Geordie LaForge in the TNG, for those that are interested. And some guy came and asked a question about, was it aliens? I can't remember the exact question. I should go and get the text of it. But
I think I know where you're going with this one. Yeah, I do remember reading it, actually.
Yeah, and they ask about, it's either about aliens or about what would happen if extraterrestrial life was discovered. What impact would that have, or do they think that aliens was going to be an alien invasion? It was something like that. But it turns out that this question had been pre-agreed through LeVar Burton. He says, I was talking about this with, wasn't I, LeVar? And we said that we would phrase it this way or something. So, that's interesting, that this wasn't just an unrehearsed, sort of spontaneous question. It was actually a pre-order, as it were.
Yeah, I think they largely do that. Yeah, they do tend to vet a lot of the questions now. It wasn't always like that, but
no. Well, I met Jimmy Doohan in 1991, and there was no that was in Bradford, and there was no vetting there, and I just went up and shook his hand, and he was a nice guy, So yeah, there was none of that nonsense there.
It's one of those unfortunate things, isn't it, where when you, like I've said to you in the past, what you know in hindsight. I'm sure I can dig up an old photograph of me where I met Robert Picardo when I had hair, which is bizarre because he's hadn't had hair for years, and it was all sort of very generic, like you say. It was just me saying to him, "Oh, what you got coming up next, and what you're acting in next, all this kind of thing." And this was, I want to say, it was certainly before 2005, because I know they had a lot of the Doctor Who people there. And this was even before it had come back on the BBC. So they were just jobbing, getting their extra money, the old cast of the old Doctor Who. So I know it was before that. And it's almost like I could kick myself because I didn't know at the time. I didn't know what I know now, but I'd have been lynching him basically, Like, can you explain to me why it is that the Planetary Society that you are on the board of for, a decade or more, funded by all these really shady, dodgy sort of entities and that. I even mentioned in one of my talks that I did about connections to the Keatam case that Dr. Judy Wood put, with 9/11, the science fraud. One of those listed there is one of the co-funders of the Planetary Society, and that they've used the platform for all this bizarre propaganda, culture, social engineering, culture. They've even had articles about 9/11 on there, which is nothing to do with planetary exploration,
Wow.
And so I just wish I knew then what I knew now, because I really could have. Not that he would have answered me, probably would have done his, because I've got that infamous little clip that
he probably
I think
would have said, "Excuse me, I need to go and."
Well, yeah. Holographic poo. Yeah, I think it was something that when I did my interview with Richard D. Hall, when we brought that up as well, I think he showed that clip on there, and I'm sure you've mentioned it a few times. That little clip that I found on the DVDs, the box extra, where he says, "I'm fast, I'm involved at the Planetary Jet Propulsion Laboratory, NASA, because that's where I'm." And then he kind of just trails off, and he doesn't get to the point of what he's trying to, thinking, yeah, that's where you are, right, And then, of course, there's plenty of videos on YouTube of Planetary Society now. I mean, they've gone to town in the last year, with their official YouTube channel. So you have to wonder. But interestingly, you saying about these people, because I know that you have to wonder, why are they interested in these things? Like, say, for example, Armin Shimmerman. He was very much into sort of like esoteric stuff and all that. I think he was writing a book on John Dee at one point, like.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. No, I've not. I mean, you've looked at more of these
Stone and all that kind of, yeah.
Well, right.
And you and I have mentioned about how many documentaries, some of them like the Cold Fusion one with James Doohan, you know, the name escapes me off the head. I'm sure you know what it is. I can't remember what it is off the top. Fire from Ice.
Fire from Water. It's called.
Water,
The book is Fire from Ice, I think, and the documentary is Fire from Water.
Yeah, which is another one that's well worth checking out. But
very much so, yeah.
But all these, you know, is it just a job for them? You know, Patrick Stewart's done, Jonathan Frakes done loads. I mean, he infamously narrated that thing for limited hangout thing for Fox. You know, the
he's done that. He did one on chemtrails as well, or weather warfare or something. I forget which one it was.
Quite a lot of them have done these kinds of things, and is it just a paycheck?
Yeah. You wonder, don't you?
Is it limited? I mean, you know, they cherry pick these people.
Leonard Nimoy didn't Leonard Nimoy do that Unsolved Mysteries or something? Or
yeah, he did.
There was some series that he did, Strange Phenomena or something.
Yeah, connected to Rod Serling. You know, the Twilight. Yeah, one of his shows. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, you know, I think certainly the association of some of these actors with those topics helps them to be perceived to be less factual and more kind of not, you know, just sort of that's the people that are interested in science fiction. It's not that serious, really, you know. Whereas we've come to realise that these alternative knowledge topics are extremely serious and indeed are
absolutely
the most important topics that you can study. Really, out of anything.
Yeah, and it's certainly been cemented in the last 12 months. You know?
Yeah. So I think you know what a lot of the theme of what we're talking about, and again we'll come on to the episodes that we're going to discuss, but that's kind of the common ground that if I think why these are associated in the public mindset is not accidental. Associating extremely important factual information which is being covered up with fiction, be it science or other fiction, is a deliberate ploy by the secret keepers to help them keep the secrets a bit more easily and a bit longer. You know, I think that's a very simple way I would put it.
Yeah, I think certainly, again, I put it in my books, you know, the amount of connections there are between, I call it the Star Trek agenda, and I don't like saying that because of being a fan of Star Trek, you know, to some degree, not so much now as I ever was, but, you know, you've got this long history of collusion between the military industrial complex, the intelligence community, NASA, and like I say, Jet Propulsion Laboratory and all this kind of thing. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory was involved with one of JJ's films, you know, JJ Abrams' Into Darkness, you know. It goes on and on and on, you know, the RAND Corporation, and then there's all you can really go down the rabbit hole with the Paharich thing and Stanford Research Institute and Gene Roddenberry and all that. I mean, I will get round to doing a video about that at some point. I really want to tell that story for some of the less familiar people out there, because it's a story that's not very rarely, you know, it's virtually unheard amongst the Star Trek fan community, that story of Gene Roddenberry and what all these people that he was hanging out with and what they were up to.
Lab 9,
the whole Lab 9 thing. It's so there's and it speaks volumes that from almost the very first Star Trek conventions back in the 70s, you know, early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, that NASA were there, you know, promoting it right from the start. You know, they had their own stores, they had props, mock-ups of Apollo stuff and things like that, you know. There's always been a vested interest. I think there's always been a thought there of this is very advantageous to us as a limited hangout, and I've sometimes called it as a recruitment tool, but that certainly did happen to recruit into NASA. But that's a very superficial level of it. It's much deeper than that. It's limited hangout, I think. But that has never stopped the good stories, which is these two episodes that we've watched. You know, it's.
That's right. And I think certainly, you know, my impression of, I think, you know, going back to sort of Star Trek theme, I felt very much watching the Voyager episodes that was kind of like one of the more mature forms of Star Trek.
Yeah.
In terms of once it got past the first season or so, I think overall, that you got the highest number of good episodes, the highest number of good storylines, and the highest number of engaging episodes of any of the Star Trek series, in my opinion. It's like, because they'd spent more money on it. They probably had a good team of writers in the main. I mean, there's some crap episodes. That you can watch, some very compelling and very thought-provoking stories, easily as good as any in the first season. And I think that is certainly for me the appeal of particularly of Voyager. Not that I've watched every single Star Trek episode. I think I've watched all the Voyager episodes, but I watched them over quite a few years. I certainly didn't see them all when it was broadcast. I actually did a torrent download and got them all that way, and then worked my way through them. Basically, when my wife was working night shifts, so that's when I worked my way through them.
Right. It's a good way of passing the time. Yeah, I mean, Dan and I have done a lot of videos of Deep Space Nine on this channel, and it's very much sort of away from what we're talking about. It's more just about, but there is fundamentally this the spiritualism side of it. That's one of the things that I really like about Deep Space Nine, and I like the intricacy of overarching stories that they did with that, which very much reminded me of Babylon 5, and they were running sort of parallel with each other.
That's right. I was just going to mention that. Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. I think you would be hard pushed to find a series where Voyager is concerned, where there are so many. Season 2, there was a Q episode where they were talking about the morality of assisted dying and all that kind of thing. I was just one episode that comes, the Tuvix episode where Tuvok and Neelix are melded together, and the ethical responsibility of, this is a new life form. Do you have the right to separate them? And there's loads. Living Witness in season 4, that one where the Doctor is several hundred years in the future, and they're retelling the history of Voyager, but it's all wrong. It's all completely, like historical revision, all that kind of thing. They're just a few examples I could think of off the top of my head. There's loads. It's really thoughtful, thought-provoking show.
Absolutely, and I think Voyager was done that way in terms of it was where the ship was thrown away from the Federation's space, and so it was like a completely blank slate that they could write on. A bit like Doctor Who, I suppose, because the thing with Doctor Who is you could go anywhere in space and time. So you basically do anything you want.
Yeah.
You could send him into like a Sherlock Holmes scenario, or you could send him into a Dracula type scenario, or kind of a full-on sort of attack of aliens, Daleks, robots, all of that. that I think was the appeal of Doctor Who. So I think Voyager and Doctor Who had a similar sort of landscape that they could inhabit. A bit more restricted in Voyager, than in Doctor Who perhaps. But I think it gave the writers that freedom, and I think they did. They sort of introduced various different alien races through the seasons, didn't they? And that kind of spiced things up a bit. So I think with Deep Space Nine, you always stuck on the space station primarily,
principally,
and it was more spiritual topics, but I think the range of what they could do in terms of plot lines was more restricted in Deep Space Nine.
I think it was very much made for that long form storytelling, whereas Voyager took the best things from, like, say, the original series and Star Trek Next Generation. That you can visit these sort of things. It falls into that cliche a little bit sometimes of flying off into the distance at the end of the week, at the end of the episode. But I think it certainly worked with the Twilight Zone years back. That short form storytelling, it's brilliant. And it didn't escape my attention as well that these 2 episodes. I mean, we should mention. I don't know if you wanted to get into those 2 episodes now or not. If there's anything else, but the 2 episodes that we're going to talk about is Distant Origin from season 3, and the Voyager Conspiracy from season 6. And what I thought was really quite interesting, I, in the back of my mind, I knew that this was the case, but I just double checked it. But both episodes are written by Joe Menosky, and the Distant Origin was co-written by Joe Menosky and Brannon Braga, and the Voyager Conspiracy was written by Joe Menosky. And these are the guys that have gone over to the Orville, and whatever, make what you will of the Orville. It has some issues, but generally I tend to think that it's the heir apparent to Star Trek, certainly much better than where Star Trek is nowadays, anyway, with Star Trek Discovery and all that kind of thing. But I also know that Brandon Branger, for example, was a very big fan of the Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits and things like that. So he based a lot of his storytelling on that. Joe Menosky is the same, but also Joe Menosky was the, I don't know if you remember this when I was putting together my research for the book several years back. He was the guy who was obsessed with that 47 conspiracy. You know, the number 47, that it kind of links into everything. And he studied it at Sonoma College, I think it was. I've got my book here, right. California in the 60s. Hang on, I'll just read a bit out of it from, I've got it here. They explore the belief that 47 occurs in nature more frequently than other numbers and share their personal sightings in consideration with a 47 being the quintessential random number. Scientists and mathematicians have not hesitated to take special note of these occasions when 47 arises in nature. The claims include it takes 47 divisions of one cell to produce the number of cells in the human body. The element of the highest conductivity is silver, whose atomic number is 47. A pint is 0.47 liters. The Pythagorean theorem is proposition 47 of Euclid's elements. It goes on and all that kind of thing. But it gets a mention in Distant Origin. They say the Voth, right. The dinosaur, share 47 common denominators with the humans, you know. So he put that in there, you know. So it's fascinating little thing, that 47. Yeah. So I don't know if you wanted to just give our viewers a little brief synopsis of the plot for Distant Origin.
Yeah, well, Distant Origin, actually, again, I think it's a classic kind of example of a Voyager episode because it's actually not told from the Voyager's crew's perspective, is it? It's actually told
about 20 minutes before they come in, isn't
it? Yeah. It's told from the perspective of two aliens. And I thought that in itself was quite... I mean, they did it in Babylon 5. They did one story which was told from the point of two engineers or workers, not the captain or anybody like that. So it was kind of interesting they adopted this idea or similar idea for this story. And they're basically two aliens, and they're actually anthropologists or archaeologists of their race. They describe themselves as a saurian race, which we would probably call reptilians. And that's certainly what they look like, in the costumes. And they're on this sort of the opening scene is on this planet, and they're digging a hole in a cave, and they find this costume or part of a costume and a skeleton, and they analyze this skeleton, don't they? And they take it away, and they say, oh, this proves our theory of the distant origin, or rather the professor, who's called Gagan, isn't he? Professor Gagan is the name of the... And he's a sort of then he has a younger companion with him. It's sort of like a professor of archaeology and his PhD student sort of thing. That's right. That type of relationship. And he's sort of saying, "Oh yeah, we've been working on this for years. Now this is the proof. We've got the evidence now." And you quickly learn in the storyline that this evidence is, they don't really
very controversial, isn't it?
Yeah, they don't want to know about this evidence because they have this thing, interestingly enough, called doctrine, don't they?
Yeah, doctrine. I'd made note of that.
Yeah. And,
interesting use of word.
They talk about this doctrine, which is that they're this proud race who's sort of looking after this section of the galaxy or whatever it's called, or sector, saying we established this and we set up our civilization here, and with these sets of values, and that's that part of our culture. And this guy's basically saying, well, no, actually, that's only partly true, because we didn't come from around here. We didn't originate from around here. We were actually, the genesis of our race was from elsewhere. It was from nowhere near here.
Yeah.
And so the establishment is saying, no, that's wrong. That's just a myth. That's just a theory, and that's the basis of the story, isn't it?
Yeah. They have this sort of circle of science and philosophy, and I mean, there are some fascinating lines. I mean, I know you made some notes, and I did as well, but I just sent this council of elders, and they say to him, oh, we're going to consider a larger expedition, but then they find he's like, the next bit of information Professor Gagan gets is that they're going to arrest you, they're going to impound your ship, and you're not going to, all this kind of thing. Had he have not managed to get hold of Chakotay, who's like the living proof of it, as well as obviously they've got data on Voyager, because the ship, the Voth do capture Voyager, don't they? But they've got the goods. They've got the evidence. He's got the proof.
That's right. I mean, he says, doesn't he? I mean, I did make some. Because what I did was I downloaded the subtitles, because you can download the subtitles if you know where to look freely. So I didn't have to actually type all this out. But this Professor Gagan guy says that he's having a debate with this PhD student, or whatever you want to call him, called Veer. And he says, you must remember, Veer, from the moment you were initiated into my circle, which is interesting, kind of.
Yeah.
He doesn't say, from the moment you joined my research program. He says, from the moment you were initiated into my circle, you made a commitment to the pursuit of scientific truth. For this, all we had was a theory. Now we have proof. We simply have to get them to open their eyes and see it.
Yeah.
And this is those words are very. I mean, these scripts are really tight. I mean, looking at these transcripts, they get really pared down to, really good writing here. This is, I think, is a particularly good example of very concise writing, and that, like that dialogue right there. We simply have to get them to open their eyes and see it. Now, how many times have you and I had conversations like that, Carl? We've just got to get them to see the truth about 9/11, and then.
I mean, my big bone of contention has been, I'm not going to get into it too much, obviously, because of the way YouTube is at the moment, but with current events that are going on, that sort of alienation from people around you, which we'll come to that in the Voyager conspiracy episode, because it's even more prominent there.
That's right. It is. And so
to see the evidence.
It's like if you listen to that dialogue, people like us who are trying to do just that, show scientific truth of whatever, various issues. That's how we can strongly identify with this Gagan character in the story. He is, to intents and purposes, he is us. He is us.
He is.
And in this particular story, you're rooting for him, aren't you? It's not so much in the next story. It's kind of this tables are turned almost to the reverse of this. But these remains demonstrate beyond doubt, when they're looking at the skeleton, this is that we arose elsewhere in this galaxy, that we evolved on a faraway planet and traveled to this space millions of years ago. Our true history lost. I've got the same quote. I've got the same quote. And so
it's amazing, isn't it?
When you've done the research that we've done, you really get the feeling that whoever wrote this script or this story, but particularly this script, they know what we know. They've been down that path, because if they hadn't, they wouldn't have been able to write that in such a succinct manner.
I mean, it's got Joe Manosky and Brian Braga on the writing credits. It's difficult to know with Hollywood, because you can have 20 different people have written that script before it gets to the credited
stage. And I mean, they may have written the story and so forth, and then it goes through a script editor, doesn't it?
That's it.
So
I would like to think that, I mean, I do tend to think that, particularly Brandon Braga, he has written some very thought-provoking science fiction over the years. He's still doing it now. I mean, but people have difference of opinion on the Orville, but it's had some very thought-provoking episodes in the Orville. It is Seth MacFarlane, which is a big put off for some people, but I
mean, to me, it doesn't matter who wrote that.
No.
That I read out.
It's the point of what it is that they're saying.
Right. The way that they've written that is a very concise delivery of the sorts of themes that you and I, people, that look at these.
And
things,
you've also got the kickback. The opposition, the official, because you've got that elder, the woman, 3 months ago you circulated a document criticizing what you called resistance to truth. You've used the distant origin theory to undermine and attack the guiding principles of our society. Your disregard for the effects of the casual theorizing is why you stand accused. You are reckless and irresponsible. You are a destructive influence on our society. But it's not too late for you to redress the damage you have done. Disavow your claim. This is the soft pedaling then. Acknowledge your mistakes and the ministry will show you leniency. So it's like, come back to us, come back to the flock, come back to the official version, don't go down this path. And everything will be okay. Disavow your, what you know to be true. You and I know that goes on all the time.
That's right. I mean, you can easily make the parallel with Galileo and the church. I think that's an obvious parallel to make, where he was looking at the moons of Jupiter through a telescope. So there is certainly that parallel, of course. Um, but I think both the way that what you said there from the script that's expressed, but this actual theme as well of the other theme we haven't really mentioned explicitly, but we implicitly in what we've already read out, is this idea of evolution.
Yeah.
Darwinian evolution, and of course, if you look at modern science, that's one of them. The two of the main pillars are the Big Bang Theory and Darwinian evolution and natural selection. Those are taken to be theories which are correct, although not proved. They're taken to be theories correct and not proved. Yeah, they're theories. So people treat them as if they're truths, but they're actually still theories. And even if you go to the promoters of these theories, they will admit that if you push them hard enough, even though they want to say no, it's fact, it's now been established that this is, it's not true. And the other theme, the main theme of this story is the theme of evolution. Where did this race come from? Why is anybody challenging?
Which is why it's a good point thing that you mentioned about the Starchild skull before,
right?
Because that is principally that in reverse. Obviously, it's coming to us.
It is,
as opposed to going
out.
Because
if you look at this story and you go and research the Starchild skull, if you research the Starchild skull, you will find that Professor Gagan is Lloyd Pye.
Yeah,
in a manner of speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't, not quite, because
I can see the illusion, definitely. A very big time.
He wasn't working as a professor in the academic establishment, but he was meeting people that were in that position, and they were basically getting the same sort of treatment that Gagan was given in the storyline.
Yeah.
This is against doctrine. It's against Darwinian evolution. We know that we evolved from apes. Don't talk about it. We're not interested in the evidence because we know that we evolved from apes. The aliens have got nothing to do with it. There was no distant origin. There's no aliens. Just forget about it. Don't talk about it. You're going to upset the church. You're going to upset the evolutionary biologists. Just don't talk about it. Just, go along with the narrative. Don't talk about the fact that, chimpanzees have got 48 chromosomes and we've got 46. Don't talk about that. Yeah. Don't talk about, the fact that chimpanzees have got 10 times the strength per body weight as humans, and somehow that was a genetic advantage that we lost all that strength. Don't talk about that. Don't talk about the fact that we can hold our breath underwater and chimpanzees can't. Don't talk about that.
That's right.
All kinds of stuff, and these are some of the themes that come into this story, maybe not in that much detail. And as you said, I've got that thought. I wrote down that 47 genetic markers where he says this pile of bones belonged to a being who died approximately 1 year ago, because they found. So I didn't quite work out this in the story, that they found a dead crewman from Voyager, didn't they?
Yeah, it was a 2-part story. The beginning of that season, the Kazon dumped the Voyager crew on a volcano planet.
Right, yeah.
There was this giant worm that was living in the cave system, and they went to collect some wood for fire and stuff like that, and one of the crew members got eaten by it.
Right.
That was the planet they were on.
I'd missed that because I don't think I'd seen that story earlier, so I didn't watch it in sequence.
Yeah, the character was quite. It was sort of, he was there in the background for quite a number of episodes. That character.
And yet we share, as you said, 47 genetic markers with this being. We are undoubtedly related to him. 4 and 7, of course, is an 11 number, so that might explain some of the interest as well.
Yeah.
And then the other interesting theme that comes out is when he's presenting this. We're sort of skipping around in the story a bit.
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right.
But he presents his evidence to this committee, doesn't he? Which is a bit before the quote you read out. But his daughter comes in and says, he says to his daughter, "You don't believe me either, do you?" And his daughter says, "I want to. Our ancestors came from somewhere else. We don't even belong here. It all just seems so incredible," she says. "Father, you're chasing a fantasy," she says, "and you're wasting your genius. I'm worried about what's going to happen to you if you don't stop." But, it's like, this is what we get. she
fear
describes him
factor
as
as well.
chasing a fantasy, but if it was a
Yeah.
fantasy, what's she afraid of? You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
like the underlying theme here is that the characters in the story know that Gagan's right, but they can't admit it because they
Yeah.
know that such a lot
Yeah.
depends on
Yeah.
him being wrong.
Yeah.
You know,
It does.
and
Absolutely, it does. Because that elder again, she says, the data isn't in question. Your interpretation is.
yeah,
And then she says
yeah,
the evidence is flawed. Because they do a twist on Veer, don't they? His assistant. They
that's
do a
right.
number on him and
They
bring
turn
him
him
in,
away.
turn him
Yeah,
away from him. Yeah, and he says, I've reviewed all the research, rechecked it. I believe we were overzealous. We saw an evolutionary connection when in fact there was none. So they're denying the evidence that's there in their face. You know, it's blatant. It's irrefutable. You know, it's a phrase that we like to use when evidence is like that.
that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Gagan in his daughter, this conversation with daughter says, "What's going to happen if I do stop? To your
Yeah.
children, to all of Voth, you'll continue to live in ignorance," he says.
Mm.
Progress held back by ancient myth. The truth must be known, he says. So
Yeah.
again, those lines there, you know, indicate to me that whoever wrote that, you know, script editor or Brannon Braga or whoever it was, they know, you know, they know that the stuff in the world, whatever it is, you know, ancient civilizations, aliens, you know, Mars, whatever, 9/11, whatever it is, they know that there are things which are true, which are officially denied and are protected by the establishment.
Yeah, yeah.
And if they didn't know that and didn't understand that, whoever wrote that, they couldn't have written it that way.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a long-standing thing with Hollywood. Just to make a point of saying that, because I've mentioned this many times in the videos on this channel.
True.
Is you know, you have these NDAs, non-disclosure agreements with actors and writers and that in Hollywood, where they daren't talk about all that Hollywood does, and you know, and knows, and all this kind. And it isn't just about the corruption and the sordid behaviour and all that. It's also about the social engineering agendas. We're seeing a lot of that now with the SJW thing. But it's also about the deeper truths, the things that I know that a lot of these actors do have an interest in these subjects. But I think it's very much kept behind closed doors or in their small, like you say, their small circles, you know. When you come to them with evidence of things like you did that time, you know, it's like, I'm going to have to acknowledge that there's much more here than just a casual conversation. Am I prepared to go down that road? Is it going to lose me my career in Hollywood? You know, that's no excuse, but that's their level of mentality that they're working on all the time. Is this going to blacklist me? Is this going to stop me from, you know? So, it froze up there for a second. So I just wanted to make a point of saying that, because you're right. It's they do know. There's so many that do. Not all do, but there's a lot that do know. Yeah.
But that whole story, I think, is a great kind of expose of that, in a sense, but in a way which, again, it works at another level of just being a science fiction episode with some interesting aliens and a tight storyline.
Yeah.
And
do you think it's a fair point to say that it's an episode that in any other format it would be very difficult to tell a story that, to be more accurate, would be because it's veiled in science fiction. That's always the way it's been done. These stories that you can't tell in any other way. You know, you stick some forehead alien on somebody and tell it like that. Then Gene Roddenberry tried to do that anyway. So you know.
Yeah. I suppose there's an element of that. I mean, whilst you were saying that, though, I was thinking that these themes of somebody knowing a certain truth and being confident that it's correct. You know, that's not, that theme isn't isolated to science fiction stories.
No.
You know, I mean, I'm particularly thinking of a film that's worth watching. If you haven't seen, anybody hasn't seen it, who's watching this, the Glenn Ford film called Brotherhood of the Bell.
Yes.
Which, that you know, you can identify that the Glenn Ford character is a bit like Gagan in that he gets to find there is a secret group which is manipulating. I think he's trying to attack his business interests, or his friend, and then I think his father's business interests, or his uncle's, or something. I forget the exact relationship of the characters in the story, but there's certain themes like that. And then I think that another film that explores some of the themes, and there's many, of course, but the other one is that Warren Beatty film, the Parallax View. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
That's from the
I was just
70s or
thinking of
80s.
Network as well as another one that's like that. That's not science
Yes,
fiction.
that's true. Actually,
That's another one that's like that, about the
So,
media. That
of course,
top off.
we shouldn't just say that this single Star Trek episode is the
No, of
only
course.
one ever to explore those sorts of things. But what's particularly interesting about this one is the specific theme, which is the one of evolution,
Yeah.
the origin, and it's called Distant Origin. It's
Origin.
in the title.
Yeah.
Does it encourage people to think, well, where did the first human come from? Is there, because the implication in the storyline is quite overt in that race, they evolved from aliens. They didn't evolve from their equivalent of chimpanzees or their equivalent of crocodiles or something, whatever it was. They evolved from they actually explicitly say this, don't they? They say a warm-blooded creature. They don't use that. I forget expression. What expression?
Mammalian. Well,
no,
they did say
something like
they did say warm-blooded creature. Yeah, you're right. They did, but they
used another. I think it's. I'm trying to remember the.
Which was met with utter disgust as well.
That's right, because they hate them.
Yeah.
They hate these warm-blooded, creatures. Yeah.
How dare you imply that we've got anything in common with these, mammals of the same type of,
And if we go along with this idea that people who wrote this script know some of these truths, and sometimes they invert them, don't they? Does that mean that whoever wrote these stories know that Homo sapiens has a connection to reptilian aliens? If we invert the storylines,
well, maybe, yeah.
Because that, of course, is a theme that comes up quite a lot. Obviously in the David Icke material is one obvious source, but other people like John Rhodes have written about those sorts of themes as well. So I certainly did wonder about that as specific to this story, whether they know that the story of evolution is wrong, and they know how it's wrong as well as certain aspects of how it's wrong. And I think there are maybe clues to that in this storyline. I think, I'd go as far as
it's
saying
very much
that.
on the nose, isn't it? It really is.
I think so.
And when you mentioned to me way back how you contacted Lloyd Pye and said to him, you need to watch this. Yeah. And I thought, you're right.
Yeah,
it really
and
is.
he wrote, he said he took him a while to get around to watching it. Of course, he was probably thinking,
why would I want to watch an episode of Star Trek?
Yeah, he did, because he wasn't a Star Trek fan. And he was kind of the reverse. He was interested in all the alien stuff, but he wasn't interested in Star Trek.
Sci-fi stuff,
and I can understand that more. I can understand that side of things more, actually, but not the other way around. But and he said, wow, that was really interesting. And actually, we can talk about another related, very similar storyline, actually, and that's in the original Planet of the Apes film, the Charlton Heston version. And that at the end, where they go and find the archaeological site, and Charlton Heston
blew it up.
Yeah.
Damn you!
Well, I mean,
that's
right at the end, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right at the end.
But a bit before
the site with the doll in the cave system.
That's right. That's right. And they find those toys. He actually knows. He knows that apes evolved from humans in the storyline.
Yeah.
And he knows that whatever his title is, part of his job is to keep the evidence covered up.
Yeah,
and that's why I think he sets the place ablaze, or he sets off a
they blow it up, don't they?
Doesn't he? Did they blow it up? I can't remember. But
he
knows. So he knows that the story of evolution that the apes themselves are promoting is wrong. And just in this storyline that they say it's against doctrine, and the people that are promoting this doctrine, they know it's wrong. So these are, I think, are very important themes. And I wonder, I have to wonder how many people who watch episodes like that, does it make them think? Does it make them, when they finish watching the episode, do they go and research human origins? Do they go and look at things like Bigfoot?
I don't know. I mean, I know what you're saying. I think some people, it's just...
Yeah, but I think so. I think most.
I don't know. That's not the case with everybody, obviously.
No.
Which I think is why there's a stigma attached to science fiction sometimes, because sometimes it can be too cerebral. It can ask those uncomfortable questions that people don't want to ask themselves. I mean, one other thing worth mentioning as well, that you're talking about these kind of setups, there's also nods here to this idea of the system, the scientific sort of control system, the technocracy and all that kind of thing. Because he says, Gagan says, this isn't about evidence and proof, it's about keeping you in that chair to the elders. So it's addressing that idea as well. This system that you've created, you're the elite types, that you lord over the masses, that you've had it so good for so long, you don't want that to change, So a part of it is that as well.
That's it. There's a big part which is to do with status quo, and really, I suppose what we're talking about is the politicization of science, and evidence. The study of evidence is, Gagan's character is a bit naive, isn't he? Because he's clearly an older sort of guy in the storyline, isn't he? With him having a costume on, you're not really meant to know his exact age, but by the way he speaks and his delivery and stuff, that he's meant to be an equivalent of, say, somebody in their 50s or maybe early 60s in human terms. You'd think that he would have worked out that the establishment doesn't want to commit suicide by admitting that he's right, but he doesn't, or maybe he does, but he doesn't want to go along with it, which is I think what a lot of people are like, in his position. So that all those themes I think are very, very well illustrated and very well played out in that story.
Absolutely.
It shows what happens to people when they go against the grain. It
does.
Shows that they are, going to be sort of basically ostracized, and they're going to be given short shrift. They're not going to be allowed to actually make their case fairly and present the evidence without.
They're also not going to be able to practice science afterwards and take their friends away from them, and they threaten to destroy Voyager and kill all the crew as well if he doesn't.
That's right.
They back him into a corner in the end.
So I think that's another point you made that I'd forgotten about that, because
destroying the evidence as well.
But that illustrates again what's at stake, doesn't it? Whoever wrote that storyline and who wrote that script, they know that the establishments will go to literally any lengths, as he says in the story. They're going to destroy Voyager. They're not just going to say, look, they're not going to try and say, don't talk about it. Just go away. We'll forget about the whole thing. No, we're going to kill you. That's the implication there, isn't it? If you carry on talking about this, we're going to kill you.
And you and I both know, we've for many years we've researched these subjects. You and I both know, in sort of biology, physics, engineering, all manner of scientific, people have been bumped off for trying to get things out there that go counter to the official narrative.
But I think what's important to realize in the context of that story, and I've said this, if people want to do some research on 9/11 and find out why I'm so interested in that, and our mutual friend, Dr. Judy Wood, why I'm mentioning her name at this point in our discussion is that she was, a member of the scientific establishment. I'm not a member of the scientific establishment. I do work part-time for a university, but I'm not an academic. I'm just a sort of tutor, and so I don't do peer reviews. I don't publish papers, nothing like that. Whereas Dr. Wood did. She had papers published. She had papers peer reviewed. So anybody that's in that position, and I saw another recent example with the current nonsense that's going on, and I'm trying to remember his name. Oh crikey! I came across his name again today. So I was rereading an old posting. And he was at a university in New York, and he was basically almost given the sack for making a comment about the current crisis. It wasn't even controversial. He was actually just saying, well, don't necessarily go along with everything. Just think about it before, So just think about what's going on before you actually automatically do something. And he was virtually given the sack for saying that. Because he was a tenured professor at a university in New York. And same Dr. Judy Wood. They didn't sack her because of her research into 9/11, but it was one of the contributing factors that contributed to her being got rid of.
Yeah.
So in other words, going back to the story, that's what Gagan was experiencing, you know.
Yeah.
And if they sack you or they deprive you of income, and that doesn't shut you up, then they may try and kill you, you know, and that's what you're dealing with. And that proves the point we said earlier, that I made earlier, that these are the most important topics.
Yes,
you know, they are the most important topics, because people that shouldn't be really be bothered about them because they shouldn't be true, and that, you know, they're just fantasies or theories, they're willing to kill people over it.
Yeah.
You know, that's why it's important, everybody. You know.
Yeah.
And you can I mean, we can show this, we can talk about this for hours separately, you know, but I think going back to the story, it is brought out in the story. Just think about the action of the characters, and it's a reflection of what happens in real life.
I would like to think that that's a very good point what you're making there. Yeah, I would like to think that if people can't recognize the reality on the ground of what's going on, then maybe these kinds of stories would sort of tick something in there, you know, just get the old grey matter kicked into life a bit. And if nothing else, I despair with the way the world is at the moment. I really do, because
me too.
I'd be on hope sometimes for even that kind of level of being able to sort of kick in some sort of cognitive processes. But that's just, like I say, it's a subject for another time. But actually, it's not really, because if there is any more to say about distant origin, we could segue now into the Voyager conspiracy, because that's actually quite relevant for that as well, isn't it? This idea of dissonance and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And I think the distant origin episode is more kind of, how can I put it? It's a lot about how academic, you know, sort of processes and practices work, and how the academic establishment protects certain narratives. Whereas the Voyager conspiracy episode is more about how an individual who's researching stuff is viewed, and how they are treated, and how they are dealt with, at least in one sense. I think those themes come out. So it does relate closely, but the actual themes are different, and the way that it's brought out is perhaps a bit different. So it's probably worth us talking about that.
Absolutely. I don't know if you want to just run our viewers quickly through there's not a great deal to the plot. I actually thought that when I was watching it was just sort of
that's right. It's certainly not as the themes are kind of much more simplified, and they're a bit more personalized to the Voyager crew than the distant origin. In fact, it's all about the Voyager crew, is this the conspiracy episode, whereas the other one is not about the Voyager crew hardly at all. So it is a bit the opposite in scale. So the scenario goes that the Borg character 7 of 9, who's this half human, half Borg, or 9/10 human, 1/10 Borg, whatever the fraction is, and 2/10 are up front, you know, that hang down.
7 of 9%.
Whatever it is.
7
of 9, 7 out of 9 of the largest cup size, or whatever. Something like that. And as somebody said, that when that character was introduced, you knew that the Voyager ratings were going to go sort of double overnight, sort of thing.
Yeah, it was Kate Mulgrew who said that. Yeah.
Was it? Oh, right. Yeah, I didn't know it was her, but I'm sure it's true. So 7 and 9 upgrades her Borg alcove, I'm reading from a synopsis on IMDb, to assimilate mass amounts of data in short periods of time. So she's basically got a robot brain, hasn't she, of sorts, or she can interface to a computer by you know, a neurological link, which of course is a theme that's been coming up again recently, isn't it? But the data leads 7 to theorize several conspiracies aboard Voyager involving their presence in the Delta Quadrant as an intentional act. Voyager meets Tash, an alien from the home building a catapult capable of launching ships hundreds of light years in an instant. As 7 assimilates inconclusive data, her paranoia and imagination, two key words there.
That's an interesting spin on that, isn't it? For that.
Oh yeah. But that's actually review. It's actually used in the episode, though.
It does actually. Yeah, it's mentioned. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So So as you said, she upgrades her alcove to download all the computer data directly into her brain. So in other words, that right there is saying she's dealing with a lot of information.
Yeah,
much more information than the rest of the crew and the normal people would be doing. She gets masses of information. So I thought that was an interesting thing, because as you and I both know, what we do involves evaluating an awful lot of information, and we plugged ourselves into the internet however many years ago it was and started downloading stuff into our brains. So, by reading, listening, etc., sometimes both at the same time. So we can identify with that process at least. So what the first thing that happens is that she detects this problem in I think the sensor grid, if I remember the exact thing.
Yeah, there was some fleas or something, photonic fleas or something like that. That's
right. She says these photonic fleas, and you think, oh, that's funny. and she says that they escaped during a cargo unloading. And they went and they came from a certain planet that they just visited in the previous 2 weeks, and they were kept in a cargo pod or something. And then it was open to take some goods out, and they escaped and flew into the plasma conduits. And Janeway's saying, yeah, right, that's not going to affect the sensor grid, and that's just rubbish, And then they open this panel, and B'Elanna Torres is there, and sure enough, these fleas are in there, messing up the sensor grid. And you think, wow, she worked it out correctly. So in other words, in that instance, she got all this evidence from 2 days of ship's logs that she's downloaded into her brain, worked out what happened. She got it right.
Yeah.
And then the next bit of the storyline is about this meeting this alien who's apparently called Tash, or that's a bit irrelevant. And he builds this slingshot thing. He's built this slingshot thing. So he's been trapped in the Delta Quadrant, the same as Voyager. And it's based on a Tetrion reactor. Which
was from the Caretaker's array from the first episode, right. Yeah.
So this was the thing which caused all the trouble for Voyager in the first place and tore them away from their space in the Alpha Quadrant. And so she basically, this alien says that he's built this catapult device, but he doesn't tell them that it's based on a Tetrion reactor, which is kind of like dodgy technology because that's what caused them all the trouble. But 7 of 9 works out that it must be a Tetrion reactor because of all this data she's downloaded.
Yeah.
And tells Janeway, and she says, "Oh, we don't want anything to do with that caretaker technology because that caused all the problems."
I mean, it was also the fact that they assumed that it was destroyed because they detonated the array in the first episode of Voyager, so they assumed there was nothing left of it. Destroyed. So where did it come from? Yeah.
So again, Seven convinces Janeway that this reactor, which is one of them from the, it's not just one that this guy's made. He's probably got it from somewhere else, and that turns out to be true. I forget if it's revealed where he got this reactor from, but again, she works it out correctly.
Passed through different people, so
he got it from a trader or something, didn't he? Or he had to trade a load of his goods to get it, something like that. So he didn't really know where it came from, but he knew what it did, and that's why he wanted hold of it. And so then she re-examines all, as you said a minute ago, she re-examines all the sensor logs, and she finds that there was this tractor beam which was activated, and she thinks that this reactor was stolen just before the array was destroyed, and obviously maybe taken on a cloaked Kazon ship or something.
I think it was Cardassian ship actually, but the point's there. Yeah.
But the line from Tuvok is interesting. She's telling this to Tuvok. Yeah,
I wrote this down.
Tactical officer, and he says, a logical though highly speculative analysis. He says. Yeah. So again, this is a sort of response we would get.
Yeah, he says speculation is not evidence.
That's right. There
was no tractor beam because there was no ship in the vicinity to generate one. But you can clearly see from the data that there was a tractor beam there, even though you don't know where it came from. It was something was going on inside. Something was going on. There was evidence of that.
And then another theme like that comes out in the conversation with Neelix. So it's interesting how they've sort of merged the mentality of Tuvok and Neelix together. When she's saying she goes to the mess hall, whatever it's called, the galley or whatever it is, where Neelix is, and she says, "Oh, I've found out that this reactor has come, blah blah blah," and he says, he describes it as a fascinating theory.
Yes.
And,
it's all theories, isn't it?
Yeah, and then he says that, oh, you know, Kes was talking about the caretaker, and Kes says, Neelix says that Kes always thought there was something, you know, Kes always thought something more was going on, but she had quite an imagination, he says.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, nothing to see.
But,
it's all imaginative.
But to his credit, Neelix then offers the sensor logs from his ship to.
But he does, yes, you're right.
You know,
yeah.
And apparently she finds something in those sensor logs, and that adds to the evidence that what she said is true, that this reactor was stolen, you know, or purloined or whatever. But then this is what kind of goes off into sort of a bit more. You know, you can see where they take the story after this is kind of deliberate, in that she confronts Chakotay with the idea that Voyager was brought into the Delta Quadrant deliberately as part of a conspiracy involving Janeway and the caretaker, and that was to establish a military presence by Starfleet. They wanted to establish a military presence in the Delta Quadrant, and so Janeway was in on it, and you know, she reels off some evidence about various things that happened at the same time. But then Chakotay says, you've uncovered some interesting facts, but your interpretation is far-fetched. These are random incidents. Granted, some of them are hard to explain, but there's no conspiracy here, he says.
Yeah, that's right.
So again, very, very tightly written dialogue about from someone who knows, you know, the sorts of conversations that we have. I mean, there's nothing particularly profound about that.
No.
But it shows an understanding of, you know, the psychology that's at work here.
Yeah.
And I think that becomes, as the story progresses, doesn't it? Because, you know, she convinces Janeway, doesn't she?
Yeah, it's like a reversal then, isn't it? Yeah, it's like coming at it completely opposite direction.
That's right. Which is a bit. That's where you think, nah, you know. So she convinces Chakotay that Janeway's involved. And then, you know, they talk to B'Elanna, and they try to sort of stop this Voyager being modded, because they're planning to mod Voyager so that it can use this slingshot thing, this catapult,
that's right.
after the aliens used it, because apparently he says, well, once I've used it, you know, it'll just be
you can use it again
floating here in space, and you can use it. So that's why they help him. But Seven says, oh, you know, Janeway's, there's something dodgy going on with Janeway here, you want to check it out. So Chakotay says, okay, then we'll check it out. And while he's checking it out, she then goes to Janeway and says, oh, it's actually Chakotay who's involved in an agenda and a conspiracy to you know, launch attacks on
the Marquee and all that.
The Marquee. She presents this to Janeway, and Janeway then responds, well, I commend you for your imagination. Tuvok was a spy on Chakotay's.
We've been like linked up while we're making these, because we're taking the same quotes.
Yeah, well, we're thinking in the same mindset, aren't we?
Yeah. Sorry,
if your theory were true, he would have known about it, because Tuvok was a spy, which again is an interesting kind of element to the Voyager story. That Tuvok was a spy in Chakotay's camp. You know, he was a double agent. Tuvok would have known about it, but there's no explanation in the storyline for why Seven suddenly.
No, there isn't, is there?
No, that just. I mean, maybe that was lost in a script rewrite. We don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
You know, because we know that these things get rewritten multiple times, and then edits made to fit in the, you know, the 45 minutes or whatever it is that they run. Yeah. So that might have got lost in a script rewrite, but yes, so she then turns the whole thing around and says that it's Chakotay who's actually trying to take control of Voyager, not Janeway. And then, you know, she says she has to destroy the catapult thing, the slingshot, because this is part of the conspiracy. And you know, and she then steals the Delta Flyer, which is the Voyager shuttlecraft type thing, isn't it? Which has been upgraded from the original thing. It's no longer a sort of pootling little shuttlecraft. It's the Delta Flyer with all these.
Don't get me started on the shuttles in Voyager. How many bloody shuttles, and they got in that shit. They blew up about 45 of them.
Did they? I've
Anyway,
never counted them.
yeah. No, it's a rough guess, but yeah, they were blowing them up all the time. They must have had some replicator in the shuttle bay that just replicated another one.
Why not? Well, if you've got it, use it. Why not replicate the whole of Voyager? Voyager.
But it's interesting what you say that, because there's almost like another third level to it then, because she moves away from it being Chakotay or Janeway to being it's all about me now.
That's
you
right.
wanted me, you wanted my Borg technology, you wanted to, yeah.
And she says, doesn't she, that she's they want to get her back to the Alpha Quadrant so they can dissect her and use her as a tactical, sort of take against the Borg. And that's what happens. So Janeway transports into the Delta Flyer to sort of confront Seven and say, what the hell are you doing, sort of thing, and she says, that's when Seven says to Janeway, you're just trying to get rid of me, and Janeway says to her, anything to try and, in her defenses, anything I say gets woven into your paranoid conspiracies, but you should believe me, Seven, because I never lied to you, she says.
Yeah. I've got something to say about that in a moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So you go on with that, because I've got one more note after this, I think.
Yeah, it's a bit of a convoluted thing. So let's go with your little bit first, and then we'll come back to it.
Okay. So in the closing scene, where everything's resolved, they've gotten Seven back from the Delta Flyer, and the Doctor apparently is repairing her cortical cortical stimulator or whatever it is, or cortical relay,
cortical implant. Yeah.
Cortical implant. So the Doctor's repairing it, which implies, as Chakotay actually explicitly says, Seven was malfunctioning.
Yeah.
So this whole scenario was really one of Seven malfunctioning. So the implication there is that anybody that sees a conspiracy or in this way is malfunctioning. That was the way I interpreted that.
Yes.
So
the Doctor actually says it. He sums it up in a line. He says, Seven downloaded too much data into cortical implant. Yeah. She's trying to make sense of more information than she can process, and so it's almost like it's a fundamental.
It's an art. Yeah. So I think the theme that comes out, especially in the last sort of few minutes, is that Seven is unwell. She's malfunctioning. She's broken. But we can fix her. By doing X, Y, Z. So I kind of felt that was insulting is the wrong word, but it was, I don't know, a little bit out of character for some of the Star Trek stories, and this was, I think, quite a manipulative sort of ending to the story.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do very much so.
Where they didn't kind of say, well, you could see her point. And they didn't point out, for example, that she got the initial bits right about the determining the fleas.
She did
thing.
Yeah, because that data was accurate. It was evidential.
That's right. And she determined that
there was a tractor being there, and it was a tractor.
That's right.
Yeah.
So she got all of that right. And they didn't say, well, there was nothing at the end which says, well, actually, maybe we should analyze things more carefully.
Yeah. Maybe we need to go back and look at that data and have another think about it, because there's something there that we need to sort of find out. It's that idea of I likened it to I don't go too far down the rabbit hole, but I mean that's what we said we were going to do with this video anyway, but to my experience of what I witnessed on the day of 9/11, when I knew that something wasn't right, and I came back from work just as it sort of happened, and got my VCR going, got my recording as much of the footage as I could, because I wanted to sort of be able to look back on it and sort of find what it was that I knew instinctively something wasn't. And it's that thing of there being something there. Obviously, subsequent years, we gathered a huge amount of evidence, not really so much me, but you definitely, and Dr. Judy Wood as well, and the basic principle of this idea of the towers turning to dust, a directed free energy technology on 9/11, and so I liken that to these little things that you saw, which you've put footage together of that, of the spire and things like that. So, you know, I liken that to this nugget of the tractor beam in the data. That's one key piece of something, which is enough to say, yes, there's more going on here than meets the eye. Now we've got to, you know, move through that, gather evidence, interpret, you know, all that kind of. There's a process that takes many, many years, which is what happened with the research into 9/11. But instead, she's bombarded here with the too much evidence too fast, and then the dramatic the dramatic reversal of it, which is, like you say, I found it quite insulting, and it relates to my own experiences with what's been going on in the world in the last year, with people close to me, where it's almost like pod people. You know, Janeway comes in there and she says, there is a conspiracy here, but I believe it's a conspiracy of one. I've got a theory of my own. Your modified alcove throw your synaptic patterns into chaos, and your mind can't make sense of all the information. So you're generating theory after theory. So theory, not, you know, nothing about the evidence that she found, in an attempt to bring order to chaos. I mean, that has its own connotations there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I did mean to sort of make a note of that. Yeah.
Anything I say gets woven into your paranoid conspiracies. Paranoid conspiracies, she says. And I took away from that at the end of, it might sound a bit trite the way because I was jotting it down as I was watching it. So I was trying to sort of think of a way of wording it, but I'm probably can think of a better way of putting it than this, but if I had more time. But this notion of, you know, don't turn your back on those that aren't thinking on the same wavelength as you. You know, your loved ones, your friend, whatever. We love you. If you just think like us, you know, the pod piece of people will embrace you back. You come back to us. Forget all these fanciful theories and paranoia and all that. We'll take care of you. We'll make you better. You know, that's basically what Janeway's saying to her at the end. You know, we're your family. We love you. Come back to us. Forget all of that crap.
And it's a bit like that's another version of what they did with Gagan, isn't it? Just in a more personalized context. That he was offered the chance to go back to the establishment. Janeway is offering Seven a chance to come back to the family, sort of thing. You know, or you know,
but
say,
it would mean
having to really, you know?
But it would mean having to leave that way of thinking. You know, and then of course she has to go and recover and all that. And
well, I think at that point, it's not a question of her because it's not really made clear how she persuades Seven to come back. The scene just cuts. I think after she just says, "Oh, you know, I'm your friend and I've never lied to you." I think it more or less cuts at that point, and then she's just back on Voyager saying, "Oh, she was poorly, but now she's better."
Now she's better. Yeah.
You know. Yeah. And we fixed her, you know, and that whole side of things is a little bit disturbing.
It is actually, It's almost like Janeway saying to her, you know, you're stupid, and she's talking down to her, and you had some evidence, and you extrapolated a bit and had some theories, and that there was some circumstantial evidence as well, and you tried to investigate it, but don't do that. You know, just you were studying all the evidence, but don't do that. Just forget about it now. You know, come back to us. Come back to the pod people.
Almost, you know, and when they're supposed to evaluate data because they're meant to be explorers, it's a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's a bit of a funny one, isn't it? And this idea of Seven actually being, you know, it's an escapee, and it's almost like they've got to sort of put her in a mental home for a bit, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not. I'm going a bit far there, but that's what happens in an earthly scenario, that people said, oh, you know, you need to just, you know, get a bit of therapy and then you'll be okay, sort of thing, you know. And this even happened, didn't it, with some German lawyer, I think, last year.
Yeah, that's right.
She was apparently carted off to a mental hospital.
They sectioned her for questioning the official narrative of the beer book. Yeah. In the lockdowns.
So, you know,
I mean, not on that level, but I've had it happen with me. I've had people say to me, I am because I have, you and I have evidential, irrefutable, quantifiable evidence that contradicts the official narrative of what's been going on for the last year. And I've had people come to, you know, behind my back as well, you know, people who I thought were close to me, you know, he's part of a mind control cult. He's part of a cult, you know, he's not thinking, and I'm thinking, what is there that I can possibly say to you when you've already made that judgment and thought that, you know, You won't even look at what evidence I've got. You're the ones that've been brainwashed, but that's neither here nor there. But this episode is bizarre, because it starts one way and then completely takes you off in a different. I wonder if it's almost like some, whoever wrote this episode, again we say whoever, it says Joe Manosky on the story written by, is it almost like they're trying to say something?
Well, I mean, I think we can. This wasn't
happens?
This episode. When will this have aired?
It would be 1999.
Yeah, I was wondering about it, because I mean, of course, people have been, and in fact, perhaps what was actually the germ of the idea behind the episode was that the internet had actually, in sort of the real world, quote unquote, the internet was now becoming a thing, wasn't it, in 1999? Or it was already getting quite a thing by then. So there were probably websites springing up, and had been for quite some time, which were giving access to this sort of conspiracy information, alternative knowledge, Kennedy assassination, TWA 800, Diana's assassination. So maybe that was what motivated the storyline. I suspect that's what it was, because they were realizing that people were finding stuff out, and this was them kind of trying to just do a little bit to manipulate.
I mean, there are other things as well. Like it could just be that they were jumping on a bit of the X-Files bandwagon as well, because that was around a similar time. I don't think that explains it all.
No. There's some very pointed comments there, though, isn't there, in that episode?
Yeah. I don't know which one of the rest of the quotes that I read out, but I read about the one that Janeway said. Chakotay says to Seven, "You've uncovered some interesting facts, but your interpretation is far-fetched. These are random incidents. Granted, some of them are hard to explain, but there's no conspiracy here." Janeway says, "Circumstantial evidence. What you've done here is what we call a house of cards."
That's right.
That's another one there. It's kind of downplaying that idea all the time of nothing to see here, kind of thing. It very much does play into that idea for me. I think the reason why it resonates for me, I do have issues with the end of it, obviously. But I think why it resonates for me is very much this idea of when you are trying to interpret data over a protracted long period of time. Certainly, when you go onto the internet and start, you really do have to go through that like bullshit detector phase, don't you? Of separating the wheat from the chaff. Well, this is good. This is quantifiable evidence that can be externally verified. This is just somebody saying something and everybody's saying it's real, but there's no way to, it's something that I've always tried to do. It's something that you've always tried to do, is try to nail it down, to verify it, to get that quantifiable level of evidence, which, is why your website's called Check the Evidence. And it's something that I pride myself on as well. But the focus here is, this is circumstantial evidence. This is far-fetched. This is just a theory. This is, it's that theme of running through that. But all the characters kind of ignore the fact that she does have evidence of something. She has that data. She has that evidence of something. So it's a fascinating idea. It's I've always found it a very interesting episode, and not in the same way as Distant Origin, but it's
I mean, when you picked it out and you talked about doing this thing, I'd already had that on my radar as well, for the same reasons you did, obviously, because we share a lot of sort of common ground in terms of the stuff we've looked at and the way we've evaluated it and the conclusions we've come to. Else, of course, we would never have carried on our friendship and our association.
Absolutely.
But I think to try and give the episode some strokes, we do also have to remind ourselves that some of the evidence doesn't actually end up meaning what we think it meant.
No.
And so you have got to still be very careful. And as Lloyd Pye used to say, going back to him, he's not, I don't know that he came up with it. I don't think he came up with this, but he was the first person I heard say it, is that you know, you can be open-minded, and you should be open-minded. I think it's a good way to be, but don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard that one before.
And
Yeah.
and another, that quote, of course, isn't used in the Voyager conspiracy episode. It kind of did remind me of that, in that, you know, there can appear to be evidence of things, but then it may not, your conclusion about it may not be correct.
That's
which
right.
is why, for example, people like Dr. Judy Wood, they would say, well, look, you know, I've proved this about 4 or 5 or 6 different ways, and you need multiple sources. Like, for example, if you were to use the example in the Voyager conspiracy episode, okay, Seven had one picture of this tractor beam, but she didn't, at least in the story, she didn't have any other evidence of this tractor beam being used, like, say, some other sensor log that, you know, it showed a radiation fluctuation or something like that. All you saw was a photograph. So, you know, you could make the argument that the more evidence you collect, the better that your conclusions
Absolutely.
can be.
Yeah. And there are counter arguments. People do say, oh, well, if you bombard people with this and this and this, then it takes so much longer to debunk it if you're a skeptic. But no, that's that the argument, I think, is just it's a straw man argument. It's just, you know, it's not, you know, evidence is evidence, you know, no matter whether it's one. But of course, like you say, the more you've got, the better, you know. Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, Carl, I'm going to have to go shortly.
Yes, okay. It's been a really, really fascinating, interesting discussion. I really am so grateful for you coming on. It's going to be a great video, this, and I hope people really do enjoy it. Thank you so much and hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, we can probably do another several of these, I would think.
Yeah, I'm up for that if you are. Yeah, you just
definitely.
Yeah. So I'll just round up the video, and I'll just say thank you again, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you people out there enjoyed this video. If you have, please thumb it up, like it, share it about, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We truly, truly appreciate that. And I will see you again very, very soon. Hopefully you'll see Andrew again very, very soon. Take care for now. Bye-bye.